call to order Environmental Matters Committee meeting for April 18th. And for roll call, I'd like the record to note that Alderman Arnett is absent. He had to attend another meeting.
Okay, Ellie Tierney here.
Thank you. And I'd like to, amend the agenda. I'd like to move that we amend the agenda to swap out Pete Gutwald for David Jarrell, who's going to present on the solar park.
I motion that we revise the agenda.
A second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, and so first order of business, we have approve minutes of the regular meeting from, what's the date on that? April 2nd? Can I get a motion?
I motion that we approve last meeting minutes.
A second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Minutes are approved. Next on the agenda, we'll call Director Jarrell.
Grab the other mic. Good afternoon. My name is David Jarrell. I'm the Director of Public Works. And we're going to present on the Annapolis Solar Energy Park, which is, I think, a good news story. This has been going on with a few right now, but it's a good news story. So this project has been going on for a couple of years, and it's getting ready to wrap up, as you'll see in a minute as we go through the slides. We're about 2 months away from operational status for the solar field. Just sort of as a high level, and then I'm going to turn it over. To my right is Will Douglas from Building Energy. They're the owners of the solar system. And Tim Ryan is just stepping up, and he's from BQ Energy, so he's been involved through the entirety of the process. So I think last time I was here, I talked about 4 big pathways that we had to go down for this project. 3 of them occurring basically in parallel and being difficult, and then we were going to get to the fun part, which is the construction, which is where we are now. But those 3 were the permitting process with the county, which was sort of interesting process, but it was a learning process for the county as well, because they hadn't ever permitted a large solar project like this, and this is a very large one. We had to work out the interconnect with BGE, which is how we get the power from the closed landfills onto their grid. And we'll talk more about that during the presentation. And then the power sales. You got to sell the power in order to build the plant. So that was a bit of a process. We ended up, it's a 12 megawatt system. We bought 4 megawatts of capacity.
Excuse me, sir. I'm sorry, is your mic on?
It is. The light's on anyway.
Are you okay? Okay, sorry.
So we bought 4 megawatts. The county bought 6 megawatts, and the school system bought 2 megawatts. So that 4 megawatts that we bought is going to cover all of our most expensive accounts. We have a lot of accounts with BGE electrical accounts. There's basically 3 different tiers that we buy under based on the size of the accounts. So we're covering all of our most expensive accounts with the power from this project. Sort of some of the terms of the lease, just as a refresher. The base rent that we get for the landfill is $10,000 per year with a 2% annual escalator. We also get $15,000 per year per megawatt of capacity for the power that we're not buying. So for those other 8 megawatts, we get $15,000 per megawatt. And we're buying the power for 7.75 cents per kilowatt hour. Those smaller accounts that we're covering were over 10 cents per kilowatt hour. So again, a good savings plus some income from this project. So with that, I'll turn it over to Will to run through the presentation, then we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have after.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. All right, you can just go through the slides if you want. I don't have it memorized, so I'll have to read a little bit. All right, that's just a shot of some of the panels from an interesting angle. So as David was saying, it's 18 megawatts DC, 12 megawatts AC. It's a brownfield solar project. It sits on y'all's 89.91 acres of a closed landfill. We're building on about 68 buildable acres on the top of it, owned by you guys. We're going to own the facility. You guys will still own the land, and we'll lease it, as Dave was saying. And it's within Anne Arundel County. And I believe it's still the largest plant on a landfill.
Right, it's the largest landfill solar project in the U.S.
Say that again? It's what?
This is
the
just over 18 megawatts DC. It's the largest solar project on a landfill in the United States.
So largest in power or size?
Power, actually, it's
Okay,
Yep.
yeah, okay, right.
I think it's right up there size-wise, but the number of watts, so the power.
And this slide is kind of showing the different plants by color code, because there's 7 different plants, 3 different plant groups. It's a little bit complicated, but it all ties into the PPAs, which are the power purchase agreements. And this just shows you the road that comes in. The little road that is existing is called River Road, and it comes off a Defense Highway, curves up onto the hill, and then we had to build some improvements for fire trucks and things like that to satisfy the county and to do general maintenance. And then here's our 2 BG interconnection feeders. One, the yellow on the lower left corner there is the medium voltage that's on the site. And then it basically goes down the Little River Road and attaches to the larger feeder, which we did down Defense Highway. We just ran overhead. That's about 99% done right now. And then where Defense Highway and Housley Road meet, it goes underground and then goes to the Bestgate substation. So we had BGE approved contractor doing all of that work underground and overhead. And basically this is split into 2. The top one is the tiny feeder that goes to the or the tiny medium voltage line that goes to the original feeder, which has customers existing on it. And then the new one on the bottom is our express feeder, they call it, because it goes directly to a substation and then gets distributed, because it's all distribution voltages. This is a picture of some racking. The racking, or tables as they call it, are what hold the panels up. So just kind of a progress, more of the racking and panels there. And then these are when ballasts are set. The big concrete ballasts are there because we can't go into the dirt, basically because there's about 2 foot of cover that's the mechanism for holding everything together. You know, you put plastic over a landfill and then you cover it with dirt and soils, and then you put grass over it and it holds it all together. So we can't dig on this, so everything is ballasted, which is the concrete ballast. And then you can see the tables. And then David went to the next one, which has more ballast, and then you can see where panels are starting to be built. And another shot of the ballast as they're being set. So again, 7 individual plants, 3 off-takers, and 3 power purchase agreements. David explained all that. I won't repeat everything. 2 interconnection feeders. And then, like I was saying, for the interconnect, the new 12 megawatt feeder consists of overhead and underground lines. And again, the 68 acres on 89.91 acres of your property. Thank you. Thanks for leasing it to us. And then here's a snow picture, just to give you an idea. The ballast with the pipes are the fence ballast that, before we had the fabric up, just so you know what that is. And then here's all our completed stuff. All of our permits have been in place, and we've been using them. Our roads are in, ballast racking and modules are set. Inverters are installed. All of our switchgear, both our customer switchgear and BGE's switchgear, are set as of Monday, because BGE came in and set their switchgear. And then combiner boxes are installed, perimeter fence is 99%, and conduits and cable trays are complete.
Hi. So, when you say conduits and cable tray, do you mean the cable tray for the overhead? And that leads to my second question, do you size the conduit for future, or how does that work?
No, there's no real future, although the conduits are normally oversized. There's a berm of dirt that was designed into the cover to direct water to some containment ponds. It was Hal McCrone designed, I think it was Century, sorry. Hal Century designed it a long time ago. And in that berm was the only place we were allowed to dig, because it was additional to the 2 foot of cover. So actually the medium voltage ductwork, the conduits are in that, and that's conduit for the medium voltage to go outside. And yes, right outside of the landfill, it goes to overhead. So it's underground on the landfill, and then it transitions to overhead on that little river road that goes out. But yeah, there's no real future plan, because we're probably at our max,
Yeah.
if that helps. We utilized all the space we could.
You don't have any more ballast.
Yeah.
No.
And then this is a nice shot of the north side, Plant 6, with completed stuff. Safety is always big for all construction. We only had one accident. It was a sprained ankle. One of our female workers stepped off of one of the ballasts, sprained her ankle. She was taken to the hospital. We actually shut down the site, brought everybody into one spot, did another review of slips, trips, and falls, and had an all-hands meeting just due to a sprained ankle. Because no construction company nowadays can afford to have anybody hurt, and we want everybody to go home. We're out there working and trying to provide for our families, and it's important that everybody goes home happy and healthy. So here's some of our switch gear. That was the customer switch gear. And then currently, overall the process is going really well, despite we've worked through the winter conditions, and now it's warming up, which is great. DC feeder pulls are in process as work transitions from the physical big parts to the electrical, all the DC and terminating the medium voltage into switch gears. And then the medium voltage duct bank is 78% installed, and it'll probably be 100% within 8 or 9 days of now. And yeah, it says here 1 May, which is basically we're going to be done with the physical work within a couple of weeks. And then it's all going to be commissioning, startup. We'll work with BGE to get our permission to operate, and then we'll have operating voltages to do our testing. And then we test and then go into substantial completion, we call it, which is where we approve everything is good, and we actually take it over from the contractor and we start operating it. In this respect, we've hired the same contractor, Grow Solar, who's a Maryland company. They're going to take care of O&M for us also. And they've done a lot of landfill projects, landfill solar projects.
Who holds the contract with BG&E?
Oh, we do. We have the interconnect, or Annapolis Solar Park, which we have is our entity, owns the interconnect agreements. And then, yep, that was just a neat view of up high. Interconnection. BG contractor crews have been doing a great job, again, through the winter work. Sometimes they get called away for storm work and stuff like that, but when they get to work, they work very quickly. So the interconnection work has been a really high quality, and the durations of the work have been fast, even though we would have liked to have had them here the whole time, but we've had some winter storms and they have to get called away and put people's electricity back on. Yep, the interconnection work is just about done. We're at 95%. And then once that's complete, then BGE crews will finish basically in the next few days on the on-site work. Because we've had the off-site, underground and overhead, and then we had the on-site. Because they're going to own the medium voltage, the conduits, and the big cabling that goes to the first switchgear. That's going to be BGE. So we install the conduit, they get to pull the cables. And there's some BGE guys working. And the next steps, we're starting to bring in the third party and factory testers to do some cold testing on equipment. And then the site's currently working with BGE to finish up the physical work and coordinate requests for energization and permission to operate. And those are around the first week in May, and we'll actually start our commissioning about the first or second week in May. I'm thinking about the 10th. So then, like I was saying, substantial completion will be between the last week in May and the second week in June, and that's when we take over the project and start producing all the time. Yeah, there's some cable tray. That's some DC that goes from the actual, because it goes from the panels and then it goes to a little combiner box, and then it goes to these cables and goes to the inverter, which then creates AC and then gets sent out to the world.
So how is it protected from the elements?
Everything is outdoor rated.
All outdoor rated?
Yeah, except for like the big, like the switch gears and the inverter cabinets and stuff. Those are NEMA 4 enclosures that are all sealed and locked and all that stuff. We have the fence that goes around, protects from people coming in per NEC regulations, and then everything else has locks.
Protect against raccoons. I've had raccoons chew on my solar panel cables and currently living underneath them.
Yeah, you know, and yeah, it might. Yeah, that's a tough one. I've been on wind projects where we've had, you know, rodents eating the fiber and stuff. Sometimes they just like the taste of things.
So,
here's another shot of 3 and 4 from up ahead. Just some panel shots. Some things getting complete. BGE again. Caught some of the white flowers, thought you'd like that. And then this is a whole inverter and switchgear scheme where the DC comes in from the panels and the combiner boxes and goes into the inverter, which is the really big, long skid there, we call it. And then we have a switchgear, and then BGE has a switchgear. And the metering's in there and stuff, and thank you very much.
so so lessons learned, you know, lessons learned. What would be, is it the permit stage? What caused I guess there was a delay, not to bring up a sore subject, but what would be your lessons learned?
Yeah, I think the county knows a lot more about this than there were some, you know, things like fire protection. This is unmanned, but they were concerned about fire protection. At one point, I think they were asking us to put in a full fire protection system. So we had to work our way through that, because that would have really affected the economics of the project, have to run water through the entire system. So yeah, that was a learning process. It took a while to sell the power. That was sort of a more difficult process. They reached out to a lot of different. When you're doing this virtual net metering, you're kind of restricted on who can buy the power. It's not like anybody that lives in a house can buy this. It can only be nonprofits and government agencies that can buy it. Yeah, so it's kind of a limited market to sell it to. So we originally were just going to buy 2. We ended up buying 4 megawatts. I think the county was going to buy a little bit less, and they bumped theirs up a little bit, and then we sold the rest to the school system. So that just took a little bit longer than what we expected. So what else was, I think those were the main issues.
Well, it did take quite a while to work out the right arrangements with Baltimore Gas and Electric. This is a really complicated, lengthy, wire to the project. For best case, it's one of, the whole thing is almost 3 months. It was back and forth about the route, and ultimately they helped out by
Yeah, it's an excellent project. I know it's been talked about for probably almost 10 years, so it's great to have it actually be finished. I do have a number of questions. Let's see. Do you have any security for this? David, I know there was some security on the landfill. Is there a gate?
Yeah, so there's two levels of security. That area out there has a city fence and a city lock, so we have our level of security. And then around the landfill itself and around the solar fields, a second set of security that they are in control of. So, yeah, are you going to do any additional security measures, cameras, that type of thing?
We do have cameras. We have cameras, but they're more to understand site conditions rather than you know the PTZ security type. But yeah, like David was saying, we will have our lock. The fire department will have a Knox box as usual and stuff like that. But really, it's their gate and our gate, and the fact that it's heavily wooded around there, it's just not conducive to having picnics or stealing things.
Yeah, there's not much through traffic up there.
Danger, electric.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And how long are the leases for the purchasers of the?
20 years,
20 years.
and I think there's the option to extend that, if it makes sense for the project and the city.
Okay.
At the same price? The price holds? The kilowatt
That's a good question.
price?
Yeah, so everything has a 2% escalation,
Oh, okay.
so the rent will be much higher than it is right now in 20 years, but also the amount that we pay for the power will be higher. So.
How does the rate compare to the electric? It's been so long since I've have done this, but how does it compare to the base electricity rate that we get through BrickPack?
Right, so we're paying 7.75 cents per kilowatt hour for this power. And again, we're covering our most expensive accounts, which are somewhere between 10 and 11 cents per kilowatt hour. So it's about a 25% savings.
That's great.
And I should point out, this is electricity that's delivered, so the meters, so the city will have 3 meters there. So it's BrickPack sells, the city procures energy, electricity through BrickPack, but it gets delivered by BGE. And as David pointed out, these expensive accounts have a 3.5 or 4 cent delivery charge, so that gets offset.
Okay. And so that's all of the megawatts are accounted for by the city, the school, and the county?
Correct.
And do we get any SRECs from this production?
Not sure how public this is, but there's a portion of the SRECs for a period of time are sold to BrickPack, and that's part of the, the overall arrangement for them to procure those for themselves. And it's not for the entire, certainly the 20 years, it's not the entire.
Yeah, so the developer gets the SRECs as part of the deal, and then they sold them as part of the, the whole financial picture here.
Yeah.
So I guess you're selling part to BrickPack and part you're just going to put on the open market?
No, in the open market, that's what SRECs have moved down in price a lot.
Yeah.
since we started on this.
Yeah. Okay, and so David, do you have an estimate on how much this will save us annually, electricity costs? Or?
I don't have that off the top of my head. I know it's been estimated, and I can get that for you.
Yeah, I'm just curious with all the budget talk. It'd be good to know what the future
Yeah.
holds
Yeah,
after this comes online.
yeah, that's been
It sounds like it's
estimated.
going to lead to some savings,
Absolutely.
no question.
Yeah.
And how do you happen to know how many megawatts? Again, something I can't remember from city operation, government operations. How much megawatts we require for energy?
I don't know the total amount. You probably don't know that either. No, I don't know.
Okay.
No.
David, this was a capital expense, right? Was this a capital expense? versus, I mean, so you can't really,
No, because we
Yeah.
didn't have any expense associated with it, so.
oh, okay, so nothing in the capital, so it's all,
No, it was
just
just
wondering how you
a,
look at
an
it in the
agreement.
budget.
They bore all the capital costs.
so there's nothing on the left-hand side, it's all good savings? Or what
Right,
is it?
because that, yeah, well,
Yeah.
that's true. Yeah, so
The
we're gonna
planned
have
schedule.
a few expenses that are actually gonna go down in addition to the power, because we were maintaining that whole area, and so they're taking over the maintenance, so grass cutting and that sort of thing.
Okay. I ask about the megawatt hours just to see if this, I mean, I know this is gonna help us in terms of reducing our carbon footprint. At some point, it'd be good to put a little bit of a, exact number to that.
Mhm.
And so are there any flares on this landfill?
There are
Associated with the project?
flares, and they're gonna continue to be, so that's part of the lease that we had to work out, is how we would have access to those, because those are inside their fence, and we've worked all that out. We're also putting, in the next 6 months or so, we're gonna put an active gas mitigation system out there. So right now it's passive, it just flows according to the pressure of the gas that's generated. We're gonna put fans on it to draw that out, and so we've worked out with them that we'll have access to do that construction project to put that
Mhm.
system in place.
Is this landfill capped?
It is, yes.
And so have you looked at, I know there are some solar farms that have put beehives in between the actual panels for pollinators. There's some other municipalities, I'm just curious if you looked at that.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. All right, well, do you have any
I
questions?
saw a plant schedule, what's that? I saw a plant schedule on the drawings. Was it, seriously, I did. Is it plants, oh, no, that's plant as in electrical. I can't, it's all blurry.
Oh, yes.
I thought
yeah.
maybe you did some vegetation.
Sorry, yeah, when I refer to a plant, it's not something we eat.
You looked at me funny.
My bad.
So as far as capping, does that mean like there's no, like, was there methane, or what was there
Well,
to cap?
the methane is constantly leaking out, which is why there's still flares up there.
Wow,
As they
yeah.
were talking about, and then David and his team are gonna put an active system, because they're working through that with MDE, which basically kind of pressurizes it and kind of forces more out, right?
Sort of creates a vacuum, yeah, that draws it out, so.
Hmm.
Yeah, so this landfill was closed in 1993, so it's all old waste, and it's not generating very much landfill gas, but it is generating some. Some of it gets into the groundwater, and so that's what we need to stop, is the migration to the groundwater. The flares aren't such a big deal, but getting it to the groundwater, and then it contaminates that and it flows off-site. So by drawing it out like we're going to with fans, that will stop it getting to the groundwater.
Anything else? Okay. Yeah, well, thank you. I'd love to get a tour sometimes if we get the committee out there at some point.
Yeah, so we're scheduling a big ribbon cutting / celebration probably in early July, so you all
Oh,
get
excellent.
invitations to that. It should be a nice event.
Yeah,
Great.
absolutely. The grass will be nice and green by then.
Yeah.
I'd like to be the concrete bollard contractor.
Yeah,
You got a
okay.
lucky year.
Yeah, we used a local company, or you guys used a local company to do,
Yeah, they're out of Jersey, actually.
oh, they're out in Jersey.
The local Maryland company, ended up with some large jobs that prevented them from doing this, because this did slip a little bit, fire marshal stuff and other things. So, they got, the local company got busy, which good for them. We want everybody to stay busy.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your work on this, and thank you for the update, Director Chiro.
Thanks.
Exciting.
Yeah, yeah. So, all right, next up, we have Ms. Jacqueline Guild. Thank you, Ms. Gould, for coming to the committee meeting today. Just make sure the lights
Now it's on.
All
Thank you
right.
for having me.
So I wonder, first of all, congratulations on the nomination.
Thank you.
We have a confirmation hearing on Monday, but I wanted to invite you in just to make sure the committee members are familiar with your background,
Right.
so we can hear a little bit about what you may have been thinking about in terms of planning. So you want to just start off with telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm most recently still employed by the Chesapeake Legal Alliance, which is a not-for-profit that provides free legal assistance to the communities and individuals and nonprofit organizations of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So we help them with their work to help and restore the Chesapeake Bay and its rivers and streams and lands. I've been there for 7.5 years. I was the first executive director, so I built the network of attorneys and performed all the outreach to the community groups and not-for-profit organizations, and developed the strategic plans and our direction and our growth and our funding. And a lot of that was through grant funding, and I understand this position will involve grant writing, and there's a lot of interest in seeking new grants. So I probably write either a grant report or an application, or give an oral report or a letter of inquiry every 2 weeks, because we're largely funded by foundation grants, as well as a number of family foundations, which are another great resource to tap into. Before that, I am still an attorney. I'm barred in 4 states, 3 states, the District of Columbia actually, and I no longer practice, but I keep my Maryland bar and my DC bar current. I practice in the areas of toxic tort litigation and product liability litigation, environmental regulations and environmental legislation. So I have kind of a different mix than a lot of attorneys have, and part of that is because after practicing some major international and national law firms in New York, DC, and Seattle, I took a position as in-house counsel with the Chemical Manufacturers Association. And so there, of course, I did a lot of regulatory work, as well as litigation and legislative policy and strategic planning work. I worked in my first non-legal position for the American Petroleum Institute, and I was a senior regulatory analyst there, so working a lot with Department of Justice, EPA, and other federal agencies, as well as state agencies, on regulations, laws, and policy development. I worked extensively on Capitol Hill with local governments and city governments, doing a lot of public outreach for industry. So I worked with plenty of businesses and corporations, and I understand their viewpoint on the environment, what it takes for them to comply with laws and come up to speed with laws, and building relationships between agencies and corporations, as well as with communities and municipalities. So throughout my entire career, it's been a mix of litigation, regulations, legislation, policy, strategic planning, and bringing together diverse stakeholders to form consensus. I did a lot of that in my trade association work. I've been working hard to do that in the environmental community, getting them to work more as a unit, because it works very well for the business community, and the environmental community is now learning to play well together and advance their agenda together. So one reason I was very excited about this job was that Gavin mentioned he really wanted this office elevated back to its former status, to be very prominent, to be very engaged in environmental issues. Obviously, there's a very serious environmental issues facing the city, especially being a waterfront city. We have issues associated with climate change, resiliency planning, as well as our stormwater and our sewer and general environmental issues. So I have a lot of experience in all of those areas, and also with engaging communities, because there's a lot of resources and expertise in our communities and in our local nonprofit organizations that I plan to tap into and build some public-private partnerships, and bring in businesses as well to green them and make them aware of how productive it can be for their businesses to be a green business, or the optics is being viewed as a green business.
Excellent. And so, yeah, sounds like very useful experience for the city, especially with the grant legal experience. This committee has to deal a lot with new regulations. Recently, we've dealt with Forest Conservation Act.
Right.
Well, not this committee, but our predecessors. We do plan on looking at that more as well. So have you worked with community groups who've been involved with the Forest Conservation Act and?
I did, especially when the Forest Conservation Act was being reviewed here in the city. It was actually the Chesapeake Legal Alliance that brought the Forest Conservation Act and its requirements to kind of the forefront. We worked with communities that were working on both the reserve at Quiet Waters and the Crystal Springs development. With the Forest Conservation Act and its requirements and the fact that there were no implementing regulations yet developed in the city. So we helped some of these groups with their advocacy work and policy work and making sure that the implementing regulations were put into place. So we do a lot of land use and forest law type of work at CLA, so I'm well versed in all of those issues.
And have you and CLA, I'm guessing it's not always an antagonistic relationship. Have you?
No, actually,
you often work with the developers
right.
on?
We do not take a position.
Right.
We are the neutral facilitator and provider of legal services, so we do not take positions for or against any project. We evaluate the projects based on their merit, whether we think a lawyer could be useful to the group that needs legal services, and if we think it would be a productive outcome. Often, I have been thanked by developers on other projects for bringing lawyers into the process because it often goes much better and there comes a strategic plan that evolves from it, rather than the community groups just being upset and contesting every single permit and every single phase of a development. The lawyers tend to get them more focused and develop a more strategic plan and can mediate a resolution. We have plenty of groups that come to us where I have to advise them that a development is going into place. It is too far along. There are too many, the permit process is too far along for them to really stop the development, but they can make it better and they can work towards preserving parts of forest. They can make sure that the stormwater regulations are followed, the grading permits are sufficient to address the site, and they can actually make it a better development in the end. I now have developers the attorneys that represent the developers know me well, and we are on very good terms because they understand that we actually bring strategy and a more coherent kind of look at a development to the process that's not there when a community group who really doesn't understand the laws is just upset because something's happening in their backyard.
Right.
So to clarify, you mean bring attorneys in from the city perspective or from the residents' perspective?
So what we do is we provide pro bono services through a network of volunteer attorneys that we've built. We do not do anything in our own name, except for education and evaluating the requests for assistance that come to us. So we would represent a citizens group or not-for-profit organization or municipality. We've represented municipalities before as well that have a question that would want to oppose, that would want to modify a development. And for example, Crystal Springs is something that's ongoing. That would be it needs to be resolved, and that's something, if I can have a part to play in that, I would like to find out a good resolution to that project.
Excellent. I know there are a number of people, including the mayor, who've expressed interest to find a positive resolution there. And so I'd like to also ask you about your experience with stormwater.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you have some experience with that, but in particular, looking at the draft description for this position, looks like one of your responsibilities will be to help try to coordinate some of the citywide effort regarding our MS4 permit. So I'm just wondering what your experience, are you familiar with the MS4 permitting
Municipal
requirements?
separate storm sewer system permit, yes, I do know what it means. Yes, I have experience through the work I've done at CLA and in my previous experience, environmental experience, working with MS4 permits and looking at what should be in an MS4 permit. I mean, one project that we were involved through CLA in the last year was looking at the Montgomery County stormwater permit, MS4 permit, and making recommendations. A client group, the Choose Clean Water Coalition, made recommendations on how they could make it better, and sent those recommendations to the county for their consideration. So we regularly deal with requests that involve stormwater permits and also MS4 permits.
Excellent. And I wanted to ask you about, because another key focus of this office looks like it'll be dealing with resiliency, specifically climate change, sea level rise resiliency, and again, it sounds like serving in some of that coordination role. So, do you have experience working on some resiliency efforts?
Yes, I mean, resiliency and climate change is permeating everything now. It's almost it has to be a consideration in any project, especially any public works project. There's a number, we were doing a review internally already about how to, so there's a lot of toolkits put out by other cities. There's projects that are going in New Orleans, Miami, Charleston, that I've been reading about those and getting up to speed on those, because they are waterfront cities as well, and some of them have worse problems than we do here. In particular, I worked on a project in the last year, was a shoreline stewardship project with the Back Creek Conservancy, to look at the 400 parcels that are in Annapolis that are waterfront, both commercial and residential, and developed a guide to how to address those with best management practices, and encouraging citizens to implement best management practices and educate them about how they can help with shoreline resiliency. We're looking at another such project with Shore Rivers, which is over on the Eastern Shore, similar type of project that also deals with stormwater and educating both businesses and residential owners how their stormwater affects shoreline. And there's a big education component to that. A lot of people don't really understand when you say stormwater, they don't understand the full impact of what that has.
Absolutely. Like to jump in with anything?
Sure. Well, you brought up the resiliency issue and working in collaboration, I assume, with DPW. So I guess one of the priorities right now is our flood mitigation plan, and that is where we, I think, from the public optics, there's a concern that the environmental issues and feasibility studies have not been done, and that's something that we are looking forward for you to work, with Dave. He just left the room, but working together to reassure the public that, we've looked at, whether or not we should, the feasibility of treating the water, has come up on these pump station locations, and so that's well needed. So I look forward to that collaboration with you and David. But the question I have is, what I've noticed just when I was campaigning and talking, when there's a void, there's residents sort of elevate themselves, and these so we have a very strong residential community. We have a lot of concern, but we also have the Spa Creek Conservancy, and the Sierra Club, League of Conservation Voters, and they basically have really elevated their stature in Annapolis. So I just am curious how you will be working on with them, because some of their projects, they get a lot of grant money, like the Spa Creek Conservancy. How will you work in collaboration with them so that it's productive on both sides?
Right. And these are all groups that I work with now, and I know well their leadership already, plus many others. I intend to perform some initial outreach as a form of meetings, and with both the environmental community leaders, but also I think we need to get community resident input as well in the wards. And what's important in one ward might not be important in another. So I think it's really important for the mayor to get that input from the residents and see where their real concerns and health issues are. Because to me, environment and health are one and the same, and that's how we should really talk about it, is the health of the city. In addition, the part with the not-for-profit groups where the resources and expertise are, and they're doing already a lot of projects that we can partner with them or piggyback on, or we can give them some of the work to do if they may be able to get grant money for that. So I plan to do some outreach initially and figure out how we can collaborate and on which projects.
The other benefit of you being here is, or the cost effectiveness is, I see a lot of these, stormwater runoff problems in Ward 1, for example, Silipana with runoffs from adjacent developments, and to me, it's, it's erosion control 101. Why hasn't that been introduced at the concept of this project? And, so that's where, when you, again, I keep using the term collaboratively, but on upcoming projects, you will ensure that they have a good program, and I just feel like that we've been a little, there's been a void. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any ideas or projects that that you'd like to highlight in terms that you may be thinking of?
Well, I know the mayor's priorities to get the no discharge zone put in place, and I've been looking at that application already and what goes into that. I think it's a good idea, and that should be something we'll push right away. We also need to look at the MS4, the Phase 2 permit for our MS4 permit. Stormwater. So project, the Stormwater Management Act of 2007 is not, let's see the most diplomatic way to put this, it's not always implemented correctly. And some of it, I think, is a lack of understanding by the people that are regulated by it, and developers or otherwise. And then what we've run into, what we hear from community groups we work with, is that sometimes the people in the city or the county don't understand the law sufficiently or their authority. So sometimes a hesitancy to act or take action for fear of backlash, whether it be from a developer or for someone else with a lawsuit. So there actually is a project underway, and it's through CLA volunteer attorneys and in conjunction, I believe, with Shore Rivers to look at the law and how it's being implemented and develop a guide to implementation, and with all the backup authority, so that those who are tasked with implementing and enforcing the Stormwater Management Act understand the full extent of their authority behind it. And I think that's something that could be better utilized to deal with stormwater and to encourage also further education on best management practices, not always being utilized fully. So not just hardscape, but different kinds of cover that can be used, including vegetative cover and other innovative solutions to holding stormwater back. Also, let's see, what else? Well, I've talked to the mayor about water access, and I know that's a high priority of his, and I completely agree with him on this, because this is a point I made to him, is that if people get out on the water and start using it, they start seeing not only the condition of the water, but they start appreciating it as a recreational resource and as a resource in general. So when you're actually start having contact with the resource, you become a better steward of the resource as well. And he likes that idea. So, that goes, my idea of making them stewards, making them appreciative, goes along with his idea of water access. Let me see, something else. Oh, also the forest canopy. We have goals we have to meet. So we have to stop removing trees and finding ways to plant them. I know that's a challenging within city limits, is where do you replant? So we need to start thinking about, I know there's been a forest inventory done before. I don't know if that needs updating or not. But perhaps we need to look at our forest inventory and see what we have and where the spots are where we can replant to make up for development projects. And that needs to be done timely. Obviously, planting a new tree is not as effective from an environmental standpoint as retaining trees, so we need to look at that balance as well. So I want to be able to make sure we meet all the mandates of the laws that we are supposed to be implementing, and as well as the mayor's environmental agenda.
Excellent. Anything else?
Oh,
We'll
one
find
other
places
issue.
for
I
those
know
trees.
I've run into this all the time as people that are doing restoration projects, not-for-profits and others that receive grant money, and that sometimes They run into delays with their permits being granted to do some of the work. And I don't know exactly why that's happening or what, but streamlining that process or identifying maybe where the people who have the grants are doing something wrong, that they run into roadblocks within the city because they're not checking all the boxes correctly or doing what they should be doing or supplying all the appropriate documentation. So making sure that's another education component, making sure that the grantees understand what they need to do to get their permits through the city, and making sure and seeing if there's ways we can streamline that process. Because I do understand that when you're putting a restoration project in the ground and you have a time period to do it within under a grant, you can actually lose your grant funding, because some of the grants, they pay you in installments. They make you do quarterly reports, and they pay you per quarterly report.
Yeah, the city's certainly had not only problems with facilitating nonprofit restorations, but their own restorations, which I think we've lost grant funding. So there's a lot of improvement to be made internally as well.
I understand. I'm working with so many different foundations and grant makers, how important it is to do what you say you're going to do, and to have that. And once you have that credibility, it's easier to get more grants.
Well, it sounds like a great opportunity. You'll be able to bring this experience you've learned from the legal lines in terms of some improvements that need to be made to the law, the weak areas, and an opportunity to work with us and the rest of the staff to try to fix the laws. So I really look forward to working with you. Hopefully we'll get a positive confirmation on Monday. Would you have any other questions, Alderwoman?
No, thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for your time. And I would entertain a motion for a favorable recommendation for Ms. Gill's nomination.
Sure, I second the favorable recommendation. Right? I motion. Oh, there's no one else here. That's right. I motion.
I'll second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. There's no legal requirement for us to do so, but I think it's a good gesture.
Yeah,
So
good
next
faith. Yeah.
on the agenda, I believe we have Mr. Barker. Come on up, please.
On the no discharge zone. My name is David Barker. I'm co-founder and chairman of the Back Creek Conservancy. Our office and laboratory is located at Port Annapolis Marina. Our mission is to speak for the creek. And because Back Creek is a rather unique water body, we are somewhat different from the other watershed groups in Annapolis and Arundel County. Because of the importance of the recreational boating community. We have 13 marinas and more than 1,700 boats in the water in Back Creek. We think that there are 62 maritime businesses in the watershed, in our watershed, which is 850 acres, and perhaps 2,000 jobs. So it is a major economic engine within the city. Playing a critical role in the identity of Annapolis as the sailing capital of the cosmos. I would like to start by saying that we just start to make sure you're Oh, sorry. I apologize. I thought it was on. Can you hear me now? In 2016, we won a BGE grant and gave a grant to the Chesapeake Legal Alliance to help us develop some guidelines for shoreline stewardship. There are 490 waterfront parcels in the city of Annapolis, and this project, which began really in early 2017, is just about to come to a conclusion of its first phase. It's been a wonderful experience working with the staff of the Chesapeake Legal Alliance. And secondly, I'm very happy that we engaged CLA and Jackie personally to facilitate a meeting that we held on February 7th this year, when we brought 2 harbor masters from New England to come down to talk to the Annapolis maritime community about what their experience was. So I can just put those comments to you, and thank you for your recommendation. In 1972, when the Clean Water Act was passed, the act, which has proven to be one of the really magnificent pieces of environmental legislation, created the pollution discharge elimination system. And water boating pollution was clearly foreseen in that and described in some length in Section 312 of the Act. Of course, the primary focus of the Act was on major point sources, and so the big sewer plants and other industrial facilities were the targets. And non-point sources took about 20 years before the country was ready to really begin to deal with them. But in 1992, the state of Maryland passed a boating act which made it possible to begin to fund marinas to install pump-out facilities. Boats up in 1972 had no sewerage requirements at all. The Clean Water Act gave to the Coast Guard the responsibility of specifying sewage requirements for different kinds of boats, and they picked 3. The most common by far of installed toilets is type 3, which is a holding tank, which can be, waste can be removed either through the deck or pumped out directly into the water using a Y valve. And type 2 is for boats under 65 feet, is called a treat and release system, using either heat or chemicals, typically salts or formaldehyde. Sewage is treated and then discharged directly. For boats over 65 feet, a type 1 system is the same but meets a somewhat higher standard. The first no discharge zone in Maryland occurred in 2002, was Herring Bay at the southern end of Anne Arundel County. The other no discharge zone in the state is in the coastal bays just north of Ocean City. In 2014, the Annapolis Environmental Commission passed a resolution recommending that the city of Annapolis apply for designation as a no discharge zone.
What year was that?
November 2014. Because the waters of the United States are not locally controllable, or neither by municipalities or counties or states, all the navigable waters are federally controlled. Under the Clean Water Act, the Environmental Protection Agency and the U.S. Coast Guard are the governing bodies, also with the participation of the Army Corps of Engineers. In response to the Annapolis Environmental Commission, in 2016, the Maritime Industry Advisory Board of the Anne Arundel County made a very similar recommendation. And then in the beginning of 2017, the Severn River Commission, which is a joint city-county advisory body, made a recommendation almost identical. On the basis of this, in late 2016, we organized a multi-stakeholder roundtable discussion at Port Annapolis Marina, which just brought out all the basic facts, tried to identify who the various players were, and came to the general consensus that it was worthwhile to proceed with a no-discharge zone.
Excuse me, at that round table, was there representation from the city's Maritime Advisory Board? You mentioned the county.
I'm quite certain that there was. I can't recall who exactly it might have been who was there. I have met with them 6 times, and we've encouraged their participation right along.
But are they on record as supporting, or?
They
As a
are on
county?
record as opposing this. We held 2 additional multi-stakeholder roundtables in 2017, one in July, at which we invited Donna Morrow, who is the staffer at the Department of Natural Resources, who runs the Clean Marina and Clean Boating programs. And then we had another meeting in November at which it was decided to go ahead and actually prepare an application. We began fundraising to accomplish this in June last year, and that activity is still underway. We hired staff, and on the basis of the guidance on how to prepare the application, we did the work throughout the fall and released the first draft of an application in February this year, which I hope you all have and have had a chance to look at. One of the things that the Maritime Advisory Board was particularly concerned about, of course, was the economic impact of a no-discharge zone on their businesses, and they were particularly anxious to hear about New England. So it was on that basis that we invited 2 harbor masters, one from Chatham, Massachusetts, the other from Providence, Rhode Island, Newport, Rhode Island, to come down and talk about their experiences. Region 1 of EPA, which is New England, and Region 2 of EPA, which is basically New York and New Jersey, are almost entirely no-discharge zones now. The entire coast of New England from central Maine all the way down to Barnegat Bay in New Jersey is almost entirely now a no-discharge zone. There are 53 of them, separate entities along the coast. So following the guidelines that the EPA put out, we began to assess which marinas in Anne Arundel County had pump-out facilities and how many boats there are of various lengths. This is all in the application document, the methodology for doing this. We found that there were about 29,000 boats altogether, and using the EPA's formula, we would, in the context that we were looking at, Anne Arundel County, need 31 facilities, public facilities, that offered pump-outs. There are, in fact, 55. So we have a substantially larger number than the EPA would require. We took a strategy of using the county as the basis rather than just the city, because the maritime industry in Annapolis was very concerned that if it was isolated as a no-discharge zone, that it might have a negative impact on the business, which of course was exactly the opposite of what we hoped for as a result of this. So it turned out that there are 13 separate water bodies in the county that this proposed no-discharge zone covers. Building on the existing one in Herring Bay from Deal down to the Calvert County line. It's basically the West and Road Rivers, South River, Severn River, Magathie River, and then the creeks along the Patapsco, Bodkin Creek, Stony Creek, Rock Creek. Excluded from this is Curtis Creek, because the mouth of Curtis Creek is in the city of Baltimore, where the creek flows into the Patapsco River. The headwaters half is in Anne Arundel County. But in any case, it's not really a recreational boating area. It's very heavily industrialized, and it's just a different can of worms. Also excluded from the no discharge zone is the Patuxent River. Even though it borders Anne Arundel County, it, like the Patapsco, is a multi-jurisdictional river that going to involve lots of other governmental entities, and we just thought that was for something for the future. So there we have, now we have on a volunteer basis to support the citizen advisory bodies of the city and the county, put out a draft application. People have been very generous. We've received a lot of comments. We have incorporated these comments in a revised draft, which I'm happy to circulate as soon as I'm kind of reassured that all the comments are in hand. Let me just say in conclusion that it's been really wonderful to work with Racine Hodo. She has stepped up in her job as an interim director of the Office of Environmental Policy and been a great colleague to work with. So where we are now, as far as I understand, the county has assigned this portfolio to Eric Michelson in the Watershed Protection and Restoration Program, and they are working through the offices of Bernie Marchik and Chris Trumbauer to move this through consideration by the county council. Presumably the city will adopt a similar sort of process. We have been asked to hold public information sessions throughout the county to ensure that the consequences of the application are understood. We are working very closely with the West End Road Riverkeeper, Jeff Holland, and are planning a public information session in Galesville with Jesse Iliff, the South River Keeper, which we will hold at the Edgewater Library on Stepney's Lane. The Severn River Association and the Severn River Commission have kindly organized a session, part of their monthly educational series on May 15th. That will be at the Union Jack's Restaurant, and I will give a presentation then on the application, specifically focused on the Severn River. And then we will do one in Arnold or Severna Park with the Magathie River folks.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Barker, for that report.
You have questions, okay.
No, you can go ahead.
Oh, okay. Two questions being, don't shoot the messenger, this is being devil's advocate. Does St. Anne's County have a no discharge zone across the bay, do we know? Or, I mean, I've heard the argument that, that boaters will not come here if they know that they can go elsewhere that doesn't have a no discharge zone. Have you heard that argument? And I'm thinking, where would they go? You know, would they go across the bay, or are you familiar with that argument?
Yes, and I think that's just ridiculous. The head of the Rhode Island Maritime Trades Association, who's a leading figure, says that Rhode Island is one of the leading states in attracting millennials to boating because the water is cleaner. And all the harbor masters that I've talked with now, probably more than 20, all report that the no discharge zone has been a very positive step to reassure boaters that the water is, that the industry is doing everything it can to make the water as clean as it can. Now, it is of course the case that boating is an infinitesimally small contributor to pollution, even under the worst of circumstances. Pumping out a boat's holding tank is nothing compared to a major spill from a sewer plant, for instance, of the sort that occurs in Baltimore frequently. But this is really kind of comparing apples and oranges. Our approach is that since 2010, since the nutrient diet of the bay was promulgated with the TMDLs, the initial focus of the marine sanitation devices, which was controlling bacteria, is not really pertinent anymore. The big problem in Back Creek and elsewhere in the city is nitrogen and phosphorus. And the treatment systems that are used, that are specified by the Coast Guard, really do nothing to treat nitrogen at all. The county is now spending more than $6,000 a pound to remove nitrogen. We are operating a Chesapeake Bay Trust project, $60,000 project, which will capture 3 pounds of nitrogen a year. That's $20,000 per pound. This is an incredibly expensive way to proceed to try to reduce the 1 million pounds of nitrogen that presently reaches the bay from Anne Arundel County waters. To reduce it 20%, which is the target by 2025, at $6,000 a pound, 200,000 pounds is beyond any conceivable budget. So we are promoting the no discharge zone, among other things, as a very cost-effective way of reducing what might be, say, maybe 3,000 pounds of nitrogen a year, depending on the kinds of assumptions you make about how boats are really used and who does what in what is really a very private act. It may be just 1,000 pounds. But even if it's 1,000 pounds a year at $6,000 a pound, that's a $6 million cost equivalent if it was done through the terrestrial best management practices that are in effect today. Secondly, I think that a no discharge zone is a very positive attraction. We have done some very informal surveys of visitors from New England coming to the boat show in Annapolis in the fall, asking them about no discharge zones. Most of them assume that, of course, the Chesapeake Bay is a no discharge zone already. And they're quite shocked to find that it's not. The path that we followed was developed particularly by the Chester River Association under the leadership of Isabel Hardesty, the river keeper. That application was published in the Federal Register last March and April. And I'm sorry to say that the Trump administration, which is very anxious to close down both the Chesapeake Bay program and the Puget Sound program, has put the Chester River Association's application and the Puget Sound applications under review. And so I'm not under any illusions that no matter what Anne Arundel County does, that the EPA Region 3 director is going to approve it anytime soon. That will be a completely separate battle at the national level, and it will be part of the same big battle that the Chesapeake Bay has to fight now just to keep itself alive. So this isn't some magic pill that's going to fix everything or happen very soon. But I think definitely the success of the New England no discharge zones really chart the course of history.
And Alderwoman, I can add, and Mr. Barker, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe most of the newer boats, especially your typical smaller, typical users' boats, are already in compliance because they have Type 3 treatment devices, and so that means that it gets stored and has to get pumped out. Now, so in terms of this, I don't think this would be a deterrent in that sense. So most of the boats who are not in compliance would be the larger boats, and who they do have Type 2, 1 or 2 tanks that can treat it for the bacteria but not the nutrients. So that's one of the questions in the application, is how to handle.
Well, I've heard some of these, these questions, and it's a little bit disturbing because it's using, it's like the argument that, whatever we do on Earth won't affect the universe, the fact that it's just a percentage of, but the other argument I heard was the data, quote unquote, the data's not there. The data does not support that a no discharge zone cleans up the water. I've heard this from boaters. So how would you answer? Have you heard that one?
With all due respect, I think you've heard it from boaters who have invested in treat and release systems who, for one reason or another, feel that it's okay to continue doing what they're doing. We have been struggling with the fact that we are finding harmful algae blooms in Back Creek now appearing in every month of the year. They're not supposed to be there. I think we are one serious harmful algae bloom away from a serious collapse of the recreational boating industry in Annapolis. And it seems clear to me that the maritime industry itself is quite divided on this, because the county industry is very much in favor of it, adamantly in favor of it. From my experience, the marina owners whose customers are boaters who are renting slips, that's what the business model is. You rent slips to boats in the water. They are very strongly supportive of us, financially and morally, in every way. I think that from my understanding, the maritime industry businesses that are opposed tend to be lawyers, brokers, sailmakers, diesel mechanics, other aspects of the industry that are not dealing with boaters as boaters in the water. The 55 pump-out facilities that currently exist and 13 dump stations for boaters that use porta potties, little outboards and that sort of thing. There are complaints, the pump was broken, so I couldn't get a pump out, that sort of thing. There's going to be a need to do a lot of education and a lot of work with the marina owners and operators to keep the pump outs going. More than 80% of them are on sewer systems, so it's not as though they're going into septic and then sort of recycling back into the creek and into the bay. the approach that we are proposing is very strongly oriented toward education, essentially establishing a culture. This is how you behave when you come to Annapolis. You don't shit in the creek. Sorry. People recognize that. It's not something that should be argued about. It just seems very obvious. And frankly, the harbor masters went away from their experience in Annapolis very perplexed. They had never heard anywhere in New England of opposition. They said, we don't understand why people in Annapolis don't want this. And frankly, I'm perplexed myself. On the other hand, we very much want to try to avoid an adversarial situation where there's winners and losers. And we do anything we can to adjust the application in a way that satisfies as many parties as possible.
Yeah, I've heard the same argument about, we need more data, more research, and it actually came up in my town hall last night. And what I said then, to be frank, I guess, is that we know the basic science already. We know, just like we know 2 + 2 = 4, we know that human waste in the water is bad. We know that it causes nutrients. It contributes nutrients, which cause the dead zones after the algal blooms. So it's really kind of a delay tactic to be requesting more science. But it's going to be up to, I think, so once the application is completed, that'll have to come back to the council for approval. And
Does it go to the, where does the Maritime Advisory Board fit in this process?
well, they've already received an application, correct, Mr. Barker?
Yes, and they've commented on it, and I have incorporated their comments into the revised draft. But I'm sure that they would like to be heard also. I'm a little unclear as to what exactly the process really will be. It's my understanding that the application will actually go to Donna Morrow at DNR, who, on behalf of the governor, will vet the application, which will then be, I think, approved by Secretary Belton and Secretary Grumbles, and then be transmitted to the EPA Region 3 office in Philadelphia.
Is this a bad time for anything to be reviewed by the EPA? I guess we can't avoid that.
No,
No,
and that's why
Yeah.
it's going to be another whole battle
Yeah.
once it gets
Yeah,
to Philadelphia.
understood.
Mr. Barker, I wanted to give you an opportunity. I know if you're comfortable with answering this question, I know this is a significant amount of time and effort and money by your organization. Are you comfortable giving a cost to how much it's cost you? Because I think your organization has done what really, in my view, the city should have done. And I think we, in many ways, owe you a large debt of gratitude for your efforts.
Boyd thing again.
Thank you very much. My board keeps telling me that too. They say, we want to see some skin in the game from other parties. And so I feel very strongly that the city should not even think about passing this without providing funding somewhere in its budget through the harbor master or other ways of accomplishing this to support the educational and enforcement dimensions of the act. With our work with the Chesapeake Legal Alliance, we've had meetings with the harbor master. I think she has some concerns about whether or not the present city code is exactly what it should be. There may be a little tweaking there that needs to be done. I think that that's something that we need to follow up with. And then the clean boating literature that DNR has already created is excellent, very deep, very rich. We don't have to reinvent it. It's just a matter of getting it out there. and we will be starting to do this with our public information meetings coming up.
This is an opportune time with the budget because the income, there are, I think, about 4 line items in the Office of Environmental Policy that were drafted from the previous manager, so it would be an opportune time to, you know, look at that and say, well, you know, do we need 4 C bins, or are we going to look at funding, you know, so that's good.
Absolutely.
Take a note of that, Jackie.
Yeah, I don't know what the number is, $5,000, $10,000, something like
Yeah.
that.
Absolutely.
I also know that the Annapolis Anne Arundel Visitors Center is very ready to support this after it is a done deal. They don't want to take a position on
Sure.
in a matter that might have some controversy for them.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
As long as they don't use your banner that says.
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Parker, for coming out.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
And before we adjourn, I did want to see if we had anybody from the Environmental Commission or the Conservancy Board who would like to come up and say, or from the Office of Environmental Policy would like to say up and say a few things.
Hi. I'm Bill O'Leary, the Annapolis Environmental Commission. And firstly, I'd like to just say that the AEC supports the mayor's choice for the Director of Environmental Policy and look forward to working with Ms. Guild. And I'd like to read a statement that we prepared for the no discharge zone application. The Annapolis Environmental Commission supports the application for no discharge zones in Annapolis and Anne Arundel County under the Clean Water Act. NDZs would prohibit treated and untreated sewage discharge from vessels and reduce pollution entering our waterways, some of which are among the most impaired in the Chesapeake Bay.
And Mr. O'Leary, yeah. Make sure your
everyone
light's
hears
green.
you. Green light.
It's green.
Okay.
Okay. Nutrient over-enrichment from boat sewage creates public health concerns and puts businesses that rely on recreational boating, crabbing, and fishing at risk. We commend the Back Creek Conservancy on their work to draft a strong proposal that outlines the need for the discharge prohibition based on nutrient levels. A small investment of funds will be needed to ensure the success of the NDZ, including public education, awareness building, and enforcement. Back Creek Conservancy estimates that the proposed NDZs could reduce the current annual nutrient load by up to 4,000 pounds, or roughly 0.5%. According to the EPA, the best tool that a state or local government can use for protection of waters from recreational and commercial vessel sewage discharges is the designation area as a no discharge zone. The proposal has received strong support from the Severn River Commission, the Severn River Association, the Maritime Industry Advisory Board, and several additional county watershed organizations. We urge you to support the proposal as written. And the AEC will actively support the city's education and awareness building efforts, and we look forward to working on this together. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Can you please send us a copy of your statement so we can get it to be a part of the record?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And is there anybody from the Conservancy Board who would like to speak?
There we go. Hi, I'm Joanna Ogburn. I'm the chair of the Annapolis Conservancy Board, and although we don't have an official recommendation for Jackie today, only because our board hasn't met recently, we're really very much looking forward to working with her and are excited about the potential of working on a new and updated Greenway plan for the city. That's all I have for you.
Excellent.
Yeah. Thank you.
So you're still working on the Greenway plan. Have you, you working with any other organizations on that?
Yes, we've been talking with the Annapolis Environmental Commission about forming a subgroup to work with several departments in the city. So still very
excellent. Okay.
preliminary, but we would like to all come together and kind of share different recommendations and ideas to move forward and including one, especially I think our board is interested in working more with communities to get their input, and disadvantaged communities in particular.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your work and for coming out today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Coming out.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you guys very much for all the work you do.
Thank you. With that, is there anything else for the good of the order?
No, very great meeting. So a motion?
I'll second the motion to adjourn. All
All
those
in-
in favor?
Aye.
All right, everybody, thank you.